Welcome. So I'm meant to be here a couple of minutes ago, but mornings never really go as they are planned. So, good morning. I see we have Pam and Eli the cat from Arizona. Welcome. Polly, that's a name I recognize. Polly, where are you from again? And Tia, that's a new name. Oh, and Lorna's here. Good morning, Lorna. And there's going to be names I don't necessarily recognize or know how to pronounce, and I'm so sorry. Is it Noel? All right, here we are, Sunday morning, and I'm awfully excited, one, to be with everybody today, and two, because our weather is continuing to be a little cooler here in Vancouver. Hopefully our heat wave is over, because enough of that. And I'm looking forward to coming home tonight for the second night in a row and not having a little oven of an apartment. I do have my coffee with me, so if you have your coffee or your tea or whatever, please enjoy while we have our little get-together today. And if you've never been on one of my tours before, welcome, welcome. I've just started intentionally doing home tours. I did an impromptu home tour a couple of weeks ago, actually probably about a month ago, because we, one of our major networks in Canada, Rogers, went out. So there's no cell phones or internet, Wi-Fi, and stuff all across Canada for businesses. And I had scheduled a tour at Granville Island that morning, and guess what? I couldn't do it. So because I had committed to a tour, I actually stayed at home and met up with the people and chatted and whatnot, and did that instead. So that was kind of my first unintentional home tour, and now I'm doing them more intentionally. And I've kind of spruced up the office space behind me here in my little apartment, just to kind of give more of an interesting background for home tours, as well as just make my office feel a little more intentional. So if you're just joining in, good morning, good morning. And I always love to know where everybody's from. So if you have not put your location, your city, your country, whatever you like, in your moniker, your name, your handle, please go ahead. I would love it if you could just let me know. You don't have to say your city. I'm not asking for your address or anything like that. I just want to know where everybody's from today, partly just because I'm curious, and also just because, well, it's just kind of cool to see where I've connected with people from. So for those of you who are new, it is pronounced Co. So it is Adventures with Co. And to give you a little bit of my history, I used to work at Rocky Mountaineer, which is the world-class luxury train that goes up into the Rocky Mountains. And I was a destination host, and I actually also became a trainer of storytelling while I was there. And I was also a trainer in general for the Vancouver station. So I learned, I've always been a bit of a storyteller. All of my jobs, retail, when it gets quiet, everybody's like, tell me a story. And I never really totally got that was kind of a cool thing. I mean, I never heard them asking other people to tell them a story. But so I always had to come back from vacations, extra pressure with a story of something to tell them. But there are some people who think that I can turn anything into a story. So I do enjoy storytelling. I love tour guiding. Thank you, Lorna. I believe it is a gift. Not everybody does that. I mean, there are days when I feel like I can turn almost anything into a story, really. Even, instructions or directions. Who knows? Good morning, Pat. see who else. We're getting close to start time, so I don't want to get too much into today until we actually start. I think I have a few people on part of an entrepreneur group, and I think some of them are going to hop on this morning. So that'll be kind of cool. Also, in a way, maybe a little nerve-wracking as well. And not nerve-wracking, just like, wait a minute, they're going to like totally give me a rundown next week on how they thought I did today. But that is okay. Yeah, what else can I... So I told you a little bit about Rocky Mountaineer, and then I started tour guiding here on Hago, which I think is great. I totally love it. And I love that I can travel and do a tour wherever I am. So I've got all these trips planned for the fall, and I'm super stoked because I'm actually have been planning this week all of the cool little tours I'm going to do on my vacations. So that's how it's going down. So today I'm going to tell you a little bit about, like I said, obviously, my New Orleans story. And feel free to hop on the chat and ask me a question. Depending on how quickly the chat moves, I may or may not get all the questions. I may or may not have time to answer them all. But I will do my best to recognize everybody and any questions or comments that you might have along the way. As we get started here, I'm just curious, have any of you been to New Orleans? Or I don't know, maybe you're from New Orleans. Let me know, drop me a note on the chat. You can do a thumbs up if you've been to New Orleans, or a thumbs down if you haven't, or a happy face if you have, or, you know, a sad face. Or, you know, if you really want to, you really always wanted to go to New Orleans and you haven't made it there yet, you do like a crying face. That's okay too. All right. A little bit longer to start time. I am enjoying my morning coffee, which coincidentally, oh, have you seen this? I do coffee shop and history walk tours. I'm not kidding when I say I love coffee. I do love coffee. I will drink coffee any time of day, anywhere. I'll drink it hot. I'll drink it a little bit cold. I'm not a big fan of iced coffee. I just feel like I haven't actually had coffee unless I have hot coffee. So no matter where I am and how hot it is, I start the day off with at least a small hot coffee. And then I, if necessary, switch to iced coffee later. I'll also drink it at room temperature. I'm a sipper. I like to kind of sip and slowly enjoy my coffee. And it's kind of funny because my sister and I are a lot alike. But the one thing we differ on is she like gulps down her coffee, and I'm like, look at her in horror, because I'm like, it is not meant to be gulped. It is meant to be sipped and savored. You know, kind of like a Lego set, I guess. I savor my Lego sets. The important things in life. I like to savor the moment. What can I say? All right, so I asked if anybody's been to New Orleans. On the other end of the spectrum, has anybody been to Vancouver, which is where I live? Hello, Kirsty. How are you doing this morning? All right, look at that. It is go time. So here we go. Like I said, this is going to be a little talk about New Orleans. And basically, my journey... I'm going to try and tie it all together. I kind of have notes, but I am more of a by the seat of my pants kind of person. Yes, Polly, you love Vancouver. Awesome. And so I've got my notes, like I said, and I'm just going to kind of start telling the story of New Orleans and why I love it. So basically, how it all began, we'll talk a little bit about Hurricane Katrina and things like that. For those of you who may or may not be in the know, Hurricane Katrina actually happened on August, let me check the tattoo on my wrist, August 29th in 2005. So it seems like a billion years ago that it happened, but it really also seems like it was just a few years ago. And I had never actually been to New Orleans before Hurricane Katrina happened. I had kind of started to think about maybe meeting a friend there and hanging out for like a weekend, but I had no actual definite plans to travel there. And all of a sudden, somewhere around the end of August, probably a couple of days before the hurricane, usually that kind of stuff they lead up to in the news. And I don't generally watch the news. I'm not a news kind of person. For a couple of reasons. I don't like a lot of negativity. There's enough just negativity in everyday life. And so I certainly don't need to watch the news to find more. So I don't even know how I found it. I mean, I had TV back then, I think still in 2005. I don't have traditional TV anymore. And I think I must have, maybe everybody was talking about it, or like maybe I was flipping channels and caught CNN and talking about the hurricane and stuff like that. But the very first thing I remember about it is that all of a sudden there was these pictures of people on a rooftop waiting to be rescued. And I think that's what caught my attention. And I just thought, what's going on? Like, why are these people on their rooftops? How, like, why aren't people helping them? This is really odd. Why do they need to be rescued? Why, just like what's going on? And so I started following along on CNN, which I never do. Like, I went from watching zero news. Good morning, Darcy. Nice to have you. We'll have a few people probably rolling in now as well. So again, I am Adventures with Co. It's pronounced Co. And talking a little bit about my history with New Orleans, how I fell in love with the city, and what I think is fabulous about it. And along the way, how I found my purpose. So basically, the image of all these people waiting to be rescued on the rooftop just really hurt me. Like, I don't know how to explain other than, I guess it's like a conviction or just an overwhelming sense suddenly of, I have to do something to help these people. I'm in Vancouver. I'm in Canada. I'm a gazillion miles away. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I really need to help these people. And I couldn't stop watching TV. I had to check all the news. I had to like stay up to date on every minute on what was going on there in the city. And I was just completely overwhelmed. I cried for days. I'm like, I've never even been to New Orleans, so I don't understand why I'm so emotional about this. And I look back now and realize that this was all part of my purpose coming together. And you see the news, you see things happen, you think, oh, I'd like to help with that. You maybe give a few dollars to the Red Cross or some other nonprofit. And I was so much more than that. I was like, it's not just a give money thing. Good morning to everyone still rolling in. For me, it wasn't just a money. I had to physically help these people. Like, I had to do something that mattered. And I think it's almost interesting because some of the first responders, if you remember, to Hurricane Katrina were actually Canadians. And so in October and November, we were wrapping up. At the time, I worked for the Vancouver Marathon Society, and we were definitely post-event and starting to get ready for the next season's event. And the general manager of the event walks by my desk and says, oh, we have all these stupid t-shirts that we can't like give away because it devalues the event for the runners. We've got pallets of them from previous years. I don't know. I wish we could just donate them all to the people in New Orleans. And they need clothes. They need things. And so, thank you for the follow. So I kind of looked at her and I said, wait, what? Like, you'd actually donate these t-shirts to the people in New Orleans? Like, she's like, well, yeah, they need clothes. So what if we could just send I would pay to have our leftover t-shirts sent to New Orleans. And I looked at her and I said, okay, let me see what I can do. So I got on the phone and I started calling around to trucking companies out here in Richmond, BC. And the first place I called had a truck going to Houston. the next morning, which is, of course, where the evacuees, a lot of them ended up in Houston at the Dome. And he's like, if you can get those t-shirts here by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, I will send them to Houston, have them dropped off at the Dome free of charge. I'll just send them. And I hung up the phone. I went in. I'm like, Janet, this is so amazing. Found a truck that'll take all the t-shirts. They ripped out to the storage unit and pulled all the boxes of shirts and stuffed them in her minivan at like 7 o'clock the next morning, and had them in the at the trucking company by 8:45, and away they went. And the owner of the trucking company was also quite grateful to be part of helping. So I was like, yay, great, I did something. Now what can I do? And it was like that, whatever it just wasn't enough. Like, it was great. I was grateful that I had that idea. But then I was like, but that's not it. Like, I still need to do more. And at the time, I'd never done any volunteer tourism. I didn't even know it was a thing. Other than I'd gone on like a missions trip, which to me wasn't really the same thing, except it kind of is now that I look back. And so I was like, what can I do? What can I do? And I just kept following how the city was coming back, and like kind of celebrating along with all the New Orleanians as things happen and the city started to clean up. But I still had that just tug on my heart that I'm like, I'm not done yet. I have to do something else. So the following year, the next July, so almost like a year later, one of my friends called me and she's like, you're going to be really upset, but I have a really fantastic opportunity. Please don't hate me, but what I'll do is I'll go and then I'll take notes on everything and I'll come back and we'll have a little meeting. So it turns out she had been asked by a church up here to be a youth leader, to go to New Orleans on a youth trip to go help volunteer in the city. And I was like, this is amazing. So she comes back and she put everything on her credit card. So she had all the receipts of everything that they had to pay for while they were there. And so we could sit down and we figured out, like, you can put like 6 people in a minivan and it costs this much for a flight. And if we ask everybody to pay for their own flight, but we fundraise the money for all the accommodations and other expenses, and let's do that. So we put everything together in an afternoon, did a whole like PowerPoint presentation, presented it to our pastor. And he was like crying, because he does that. And he was like, you don't understand. I've been praying for somebody to come forward and plan a missions trip. You guys are an answer to my prayers. And so then we had to present the whole idea to the board of elders. And then we had to like give them a couple of different cities we could also go to in case they felt that like New Orleans wasn't quite the right thing. So we had to wait for a month, and we finally got the go ahead to go on, and they called us and said, yes, New Orleans is it. So we started planning the trip for the next July. And I can tell you, there are so many things in my life that were amazing leading up to that, in that year, leading up to that first trip, that I'm actually, you can't see it because it doesn't show, but I'm wearing a t-shirt today that says blessed, because that's exactly how I feel. So both my friend and I were not youth leaders, but we were taking a youth group to New Orleans to volunteer. And then we added on some adults who also wanted to go and help. And the cool thing about New Orleans is people want to go to New Orleans. And so people will actually go and volunteer in New Orleans because they want to go. And we'll get into a little bit more of that as I tell my story. So we did that first trip, and leading up, we did a lot of fundraising, and a lot of the people at the church were involved. And I will never, ever forget this. We had one Sunday close to when we were getting ready to go on the trip, and our fundraising efforts had been hugely successful. And we were just so grateful. I ended up losing my job right before we went, and somebody actually paid for my plane ticket for me, which was just like unbelievable, like absolutely unbelievable that somebody in a way would believe in me that much and what I was doing, that they would pay for my plane ticket to go. Right, Lorna? Like, just amazing. Like, I get goosebumps talking about all these amazing things that happen. We had a little guy who's like 9 years old at the time. I think his name was Andrew. And they wanted to do a little presentation with Andrew, and Andrew had saved up. This 9-year-old kid had saved up his allowance to donate it to help with our trip. Like, how amazing is that? And that was when it really kind of started to turn for me that, I mean, I knew all along that I was doing something good, and I wasn't looking for accolades. I was just looking for a way to help. Like, I just wanted to help. And the fact that all these people believed in my mission was so mind blowing. And years later, I designed a tattoo for my back. And every time I went to New Orleans, I added a new piece of the tattoo on. And I had 4 words that began to mean so much to me right from that first trip. So each word was added with the fleur-de-lis, which is the symbol of recovery and rebirth in New Orleans. And instead of the little band around the fleur-de-lis, oh, thank you, Audra. Instead of a little band around the fleur-de-lis, I actually put a little heart because I felt so loved. And in fact, my whole life, I didn't grow up in a super close family. We weren't one of those families who were like, oh, I love you, like whatever. And so I never really used that word. I kind of felt like it's a bit of a 4-letter word to me until we were getting ready to go to New Orleans. And I remember being on the trip, and we were in the minivan, and we were on our way somewhere. And this one gal that I knew from church a little better than the others because she did some refereeing for me, and her name was Anna. And Anna did something or said something or whatever. And I turned around and I said, oh, Anna, I love you. And I kind of stopped and I was like, oh, where'd that word come from? And I kind of had to think about it for a minute. And I'm like, man, like, I love everybody who's here. Like, I love everybody who helped us get here. I love people. Like, I actually love people. Huh. So I have this tattoo. It totally opened my heart, like totally. And then I got to New Orleans and it was even more. So the tattoo, you're probably like, get to the point where you tell us what the 4 words are. So the 4 words on my tattoo are love, faith, hope, and dream. Dream for so many reasons, partly because it was my dream to help people in New Orleans, and I did it. And it was, I learned how to dream, but also that dreams really actually were attainable. Faith, I have a saying where when I got involved with New Orleans, what is it I say? I ditched my religion to find my faith or something like that. Good morning, Jean. We're just a few minutes into my chat here. But I think you should be able to join in. And so I really kind of ditched the whole concept of like, all the written rules of faith and everything, and just thought it's so much more important to just live it than talk about it. And to me, like we got to New Orleans, and I don't know how much you know about Hurricane Katrina and everything that happened, but there was this documentary put out by Spike Lee, right in time. It came out in like the February before we went in July to New Orleans, and Spike Lee had gone to New Orleans to help, and he was like rescuing people out of with a boat out of houses, and they were going, and like, just, it's an amazing documentary. Heart-wrenching. Like, I still can't even, I've watched it a billion times. I still can't watch it without crying because it's just so touching and so real. And so Spike Lee ended up with this pastor, Pastor Willie, who was born and raised New Orleans. And this guy, I could just tell Willie was a character. And so I didn't really tell my team, other than when we were getting ready to go, a few of us had watched a documentary, and I did say, hey, so I found the pastor from when the levees broke, and we're going to go to his church on Sunday morning, and that'll be, because our first full day in New Orleans was a Sunday. And so I'm like, we'll go to Pastor Willie's church and it'll be fun. So we went to his church. It's one of those cool little tiny houses. Of course, they lost their building in the storm. They were sharing a building with someone else. We got there for the service. It was like raining like nobody's business. And we get to church and we're all excited because we're in this like just amazing tiny little church in New Orleans, and it's our first day and life is fabulous. And we were so surprised because at the end of the service, they had actually prepared an entire typical New Orleans lunch, complete with jambalaya and everything, pound cake. They had a cooler full of sodas, and they had gone to all this work to prepare a lunch for us. I think there was 19 or 20 of us. And I think that was like the first real moment of just being completely overwhelmed by everything. And then after that, I planned for them. I found out you could rent like a streetcar. The streetcars had literally just started running again in New Orleans right before we got there. And for $400, you could commission a streetcar to do the route once. And it would just be your private car. You could decorate it. You could do whatever. And so I took them on a tour of New Orleans in the pouring rain in this old green streetcar. Now, if you've seen pictures of New Orleans, they have two streetcar styles. They have the red ones and the green ones. The red ones are the newer ones. And of course they were on the ground when Hurricane Katrina hit, and they all got damaged. But the green ones were so old, they were actually up in storage out of the way. And so they actually, once they got the tracks fixed, they brought back the green streetcars and used them all over the city because that's all they had till they got the red ones fixed. If you ever watch the Disney movie Princess and the Frog, you'll actually see that story. That whole movie was based on New Orleans in the 1920s. And they actually show the green streetcars, and everything is actually done historically to the 1920s in New Orleans. So it's pretty cool. Good morning to everybody joining us. I am telling my story about how I fell in love with New Orleans. It's not something I think you needed to be here for the beginning for. I really think that you can hop in now and hang out for a bit and hear some cool stories. So moving on, let me tell you about some of the people we met in New Orleans, and that'll also help tell some of my story. And so my first vivid memory is we were all looking pretty sweaty. It was July. It was nice and hot in New Orleans, and we were mold remediating a house, which is like so much work. It's when they bring it all down to just the beams, and you're literally scraping all the beams, getting the mold out and opening up, I guess, the pores of the wood. And then they do this whole like fog thing, and then they bring somebody in and they test it to see if they've gotten rid of all of the mold, and they carry on. So here we were in this house mold remediating, and we were all looking pretty sweaty and dreadful. And we would we'd go in and work for like, I don't know, an hour or 45 minutes and come out and take like a 20-minute break. And I'm outside getting some water, and this lady pulls up in the driveway. And I'm like, oh, okay. And she gets out and she starts to cry immediately. And I'm like, oh, I hope she's okay. Like, she's just driving down the street and something happened. Did she get some bad news? So I walk over to her and I'm like, hey, are you okay? Is there something I can do to help? And she literally, tears streaming down her face. And I'm like, can I help you? Like, what can we do? Can I get someone? Can I call someone? And she looks at me and she's like, you don't understand. She's like, this is my house. I'm the house owner. I'm like, oh. And so I was like, are we doing something wrong? Should we not be here? Like, I don't know what's going on. And so I said, okay, is it okay that we're here? Like, are you, she looks at me and she's like, I was told we had no more volunteers for my house till September. She goes, so I thought nobody was going to be working on my house. I'm just trying to get home for Thanksgiving. I haven't been home for Thanksgiving since before Katrina, and we didn't think we were going to be able to get home for Thanksgiving. Like, it just, we're living wherever. And she goes, but the fact that there's volunteers here working on my house this week, I don't know, maybe we'll actually get to come home for Thanksgiving. And literally just crying buckets. And she left right away. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess, like, I don't know what it's like to be in this situation. I guess she was just really overwhelmed. She comes back 10 minutes later with like 4 trays of snowballs right? So the shaved ice with the filling or the topping on it, right? They're all different flavors. And she comes back with these snowballs, and she comes in, she's like, I don't have much, but I can get you guys snowballs. I just want to say thank you for working on my house. Where are y'all from? And so we look at her and we're like, oh, we don't ever assume everybody knows where we're from, like the geography of Canada. So our standard answer was, oh, we're from Vancouver, Canada, in case people know more about Vancouver, Washington than Vancouver, BC. And she's like, wait, what? Where are you from? And we're like, oh, well, we're from Canada, like the West Coast, like Vancouver. And she started to cry all over again. And we're like, are you okay? Like, what's wrong? And she looks at us and she's like, I can't believe y'all came down here from Canada to fix my house. And I just thought that is such a cute way to think of it. Like, I mean, we didn't come down to fix her house. We just came down to help. And everywhere we went in the city that week, we kind of learned, I'm not going to lie, we learned to say we were from Canada right up front. We got treated like rock stars because we were from Canada and we had come down to help in New Orleans. Like, how fun is that? I remember we took the kids shopping to the mall on our last day, and we went to Build-A-Bear because I worked at Build-A-Bear at the time, and the kids were out checking out the mall, and they come running back to me and they're like, go. Guess what? We were in the store and they asked us where we were from because we talked funny. And so we said we were from Canada, and they're like, oh, what are you doing down here? Because like not many people are coming to New Orleans at that point because it was still just such a mess. And they said, oh, well, we came down to volunteer and help rebuild houses this week. And then they're like, they gave us 25% off in the store. Like, that's so crazy. We just came to help. Like, this is our summer project, like, here for a week. And they were so blown away. And it was so neat to see these kids so excited about people being excited about them. I mean, they just thought they were going on a missions trip. Sorry, I need a sip of my coffee. And that's actually one of the things I learned. Outpouring sense of gratitude. Absolutely. We and my team was equally as amazing as the people in New Orleans are. In the second year we were serving we always did a night serving at the mission. That's how I planned the trips. Because I wanted the people coming with me to experience every possible part of New Orleans that they could in a week. So we would volunteer at the missions. We build houses, and we were at the missions one night and we all had team t-shirts done sponsored by a local hotel. And the ones for year 2 were like really, really cool. They were like turquoise and they had this fleur-de-lis and a maple leaf on it, and the connection between Canada and New Orleans and we were at this the New Orleans mission. And somebody came up to one of our team members and he said, hey man, like, I really like your shirt. Where'd you get it? How do I get one? And he turned around and he literally took the shirt off him and gave it to the man. And he was like, here, have my shirt. And it was so amazing that no matter who came to New Orleans and what their reason was to come on the missions trip, they all just stepped into the role and were just so gracious and loving to the people in New Orleans. And in return, or not even in return, we experienced the same thing from people in New Orleans. And it was just so eye-opening to see these people who'd lost, in some cases, literally everything they had. And they would do something even above their means. And often that was something very tiny to help. I went down a couple of times. I went down on my own as just like a little retreat, and I'd go and volunteer for a few days. And after going to New Orleans for about 4 or 5 years, I became part of the community, and I had friends who were musicians on Bourbon Street, and I'd met people through other means and by joining groups on, Facebook, and just had all these amazing experiences. And so this one time I went down on my own, and I was so excited to be there. And my project leader was like the same story, where when Hurricane Katrina happened, she just had to help. And so she had moved from Maine, Portland, from Maine, the state of Maine, down to New Orleans to just be there on the ground for like 3 years. She had committed to do that for like 2 or 3 years. And so we were at this one site working together, and she said, oh, that the host family, the family who owns this house, is really, really cool. I think you'll like them. And it was funny because when you think of New Orleans, you think of white people, you think of Black people, but there's this really amazing Asian community in New Orleans as well. And I got to work on this house with this family that had this incredible story. The house had been in the family for generations, and it was a double shotgun. And then they almost completely lost it during the storm. They lost some property across the street that was like a business of theirs. And they'd been living in Houston and had come back to fix up the house. And we're having help with St. Bernard Project, which is where I always volunteer in New Orleans, SBP USA. And so I'm at this one house, and the project manager warned me. She said, the lady's going to come in and she's going to know everything that St. Bernard Project knows about you, because she wants to know everybody who had a part in bringing her house back. And not only did she know everything, but she had 3 little kids under the age of 4. That's amazing. And every day she came to the work site, to her house, with her 3 little kids in tow. And they all knew names of everybody. And she walked in and she looked at me and she's like, you're Co, and you're from Canada, and you're here for a week to work on my house. And it just blew me away. And do you know that they brought us freshly squeezed lemonade that day? Her and the kids made lemonade and brought it over in 4 big containers to the house for the volunteers. She's like, I don't have much, but I want to do something. So every day they did something for the volunteers. And every Friday they did a traditional fish fry for all the volunteers as well, which was so cool. And that was, again, like every house that I volunteered at, I learned something more. I had experiences. Like, to me, New Orleans is just a really magic city. And I fully believe that when you go to New Orleans, it's a vacation like any other time you go on vacation. So I always say, have a plan of things you want to do, but also leave a lot of room for flexibility, because if you do New Orleans right, you'll meet all kinds of people and have great experiences. And you might even end up sitting on somebody's front porch and just hanging out for the evening, because that's how they do things down there. New Orleans celebrates the lost art of living in the moment. And I have learned to live in the moment through these amazing people. And it just has been, I feel like, and I say to people, like, people will be like, hey, do you have a volunteer trip coming up? Like, I want to go. I want to go help the people. I want to do some good. I know it's been a long time. It's been 17 years and people are still trying to move home because, I tell everybody everything going on in New Orleans. And so for me, it's, I say to them, I think it's great that you're going down and you want to help people, but I just have to warn you, you're probably going to get as much help from the people you're helping, if not more, than you would ever realize. People go to New Orleans to volunteer with me, and they end up being so blessed and so accepted and blown away, and that there are oftentimes, I think, they get more out of the trip than they give. And believe me, when you're volunteering from 8 to 4 every day and rebuilding houses, you're giving a lot. And we had these two Thank you, Darcy. We had these two they were 19 or 20, and their whole family had come down to New Orleans year two, as part of a family venture to see New Orleans, but also to volunteer and do some good. And I'm not stupid. They're 20. I found out they had fake IDs. I was like, I do not know this. Do not tell me. We don't have that many free nights anyways. As long as you show up at the work site, we're all good. Plus, the parents were there of one of them anyways. So it was this girl and her best friend. And they were like, yeah, we'll come to New Orleans. We'll do some help. Do you know those two girls worked harder than everyone? I mean, everyone worked hard, but they were like first ones on site digging in. They were the last ones still cleaning up on our way out for the day. We didn't have something to mix the mud for mudding with, and they had their hands in there mixing. Like, they just did whatever it takes. They were so amazing. And one of them had a birthday while we were there, so we took them to Build-A-Bear, and we had got some extra money in our fundraising, and so we let her pick any bear she wanted and any outfit and whatever. And then we did a whole heart ceremony for her bear together, and it was really cool because I talked to the Build-A-Bear people before I went, because I worked at Build-A-Bear at the time, and they were like, yeah, we're gonna have you do the heart ceremony because you know these guys and you know how to do it up. And it was just like so cool, because there we were in New Orleans, and I was like leading a heart ceremony for this incredible young lady who had come down to see New Orleans and, you know, all that kind of thing, and ended up being probably the most impacted of the whole group. And in fact, those two young ladies flew to San Francisco after and ended up taking the train back to Vancouver, slowly through the West Coast. And as soon as they got to San Francisco, the first thing they did was get tattoos, matching tattoos on their wrist. I think it was something like, I don't know if they did. I think it was something like St. Bernard, or Bernard was what they tattooed, because they wanted to remember volunteering for St. Bernard Project and all these amazing memories. And it started to hit me where I was like, and I get goosebumps right now talking about it. I am so lucky because I get to coordinate these trips for people to come down and help the people of New Orleans, and in turn end up being so blessed themselves through the experience. And I just thought, this is like one of the coolest things in the world. Like, I get to make an impact, not only in a family, but in the person doing the volunteer. Like, it just was so amazing to me that I would have the opportunity to do something so powerful. And yet all it came from was my desire to help some people in a really horrible situation that I honestly felt completely powerless. Like, what could I possibly do as one person? What could I do to help a city? And it's just been like, I mean, I have hundreds and hundreds of stories of things that have happened on these trips that are just, if I was trying to guess what could have happened from these experiences, I never would have guessed in a million years. I met these school teachers in year 5 or year 6. And so I accidentally booked a flight flying through LAX, and I'd heard LAX was like a horrible airport. And oh no, I know what it was. The first year we went down, we went through LAX, and our trip was delayed by 6 hours when we were switching planes. And so I'm managing all these teenagers in an airport who were spending all their spending money for the week in an airport trying to buy food. So I negotiated some coupons for them and stuff like that so they'd stop spending their money. And I was just like, what a nightmare experience. I'm never flying through LAX ever again. So here I am heading down in August to go volunteer. I think that time is when I was volunteering. Yes, I was volunteering with the Recovery School District. I had met somebody who was a volunteer coordinator. And so I dedicated an entire week of just painting classrooms, just to kind of see. I wanted to work with other parts and things of New Orleans, learn other processes, stuff like that. meet more nonprofit leaders, and just really immerse myself in the city. So I went down to help with the Recovery School District, and I was helping with the International School of New Orleans, which is used to be Rob Wayne Middle School, and they were turning it into an international high school. And so here I was volunteering, and it was hot and there wasn't proper air conditioning, but it's just one of those like, suck it up, whatever. Like, if nothing else, my skin was so soft by the end of the week from sweating so much that it was great. So I remember I was there, and I was painting a doorway, and, you know, like, we had the music on, and the coordinator, Troy, was amazing. And I learned so much on how to deal with groups and people and personalities and things like that, just from watching him work with people. And so here I am, we're painting, and the song of the day came on. And so we had to yell out loud how many times we'd heard that song that day. And I think we were already at 3 for our song of the day. And I'm giggling away. And all of a sudden, I just got this feeling wash over me from head to toe. And I instantly knew, this is exactly where I'm meant to be. And I don't mean like in New Orleans painting a classroom. This, in New Orleans, I was on the right track. I knew without a doubt in my whole being that this was right. I'd done all kinds of stuff before. I was a basketball coach as a volunteer, and you know, I volunteered at Theater Under the Stars and the film festival and all these different things, but nothing filled me up like being in New Orleans, bringing people to New Orleans, seeing them in New Orleans, meeting people, like bringing people together. Like, it was just so incredible. And I will forever remember that moment, literally painting a doorway and just like, this is where I'm meant to be. Spirit works through people in mysterious ways to inspire others. Absolutely. Absolutely. The other thing where I knew I was definitely getting into my purpose was in that first trip. The adults, we had planned a separate trip for the adults, but we planned it in the same format as our teenagers were going to be doing with their youth trip. And on the Thursday night, we had a night off from the kids program, and we had given somehow Thursday night kind of the night off to the adults. So we hadn't seen these people since Sunday. And there was like 8 adults and 11 of us with the youth program. And so we got to meet up. So we chose Café du Monde in the French Quarter to meet up. And that was back in the day when Café du Monde was still like a real tourist attraction. Like, people went there to see the show from the waiters and experience the culture of New Orleans. And like, it was just fabulous. So we get there, and some of the people that were on the adult trip were actual youth leaders of the kids that we were with. And so they knew each other, but some of them didn't know each other at all, other than we had fundraised together as a team to raise the money to be in the experience. So we get there, and I'm sitting there, and the kids and I and the leaders had already been there for a few minutes, but we were waiting for the others to get to us or to reach us. And when they arrived, you would have think they were long lost family who hadn't seen each other for a decade. They got up and they were screaming and so excited and giggling, and they couldn't talk fast enough on both sides to tell stories, and like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. I love this. And we did this and we did that. And what did you do? Well, we did this. And oh my gosh, we did that. And they were like laughing, and the smiles on their faces were so big. And I remember sitting there with goosebumps, getting goosebumps again as I tell the story, and just watching and thinking, this is amazing. These people are so happy. We've built a team to come down here. They appreciate each other. They get what's going on, and they are all genuinely happy and excited to share their own personal experience. And I just thought, again, I am the luckiest person in the world to be able to facilitate this. Like, how amazing, how amazing. And so between that and realizing I could be a catalyst, because most of the people who have come with me to New Orleans, and we're talking over the years, probably about 70 or 80 people, they come back and they all find a way to be permanently involved in their community as a volunteer. And people have done things like gone and volunteered at the SPCA, taken dogs for walks. They've gone and volunteered at our local soup kitchens or the big Vancouver Mission, or they've found other ways to volunteer and be involved in their community. And some of these are people who've never grew up with the spirit of volunteering. They didn't have a family that enveloped that. My family did, so that was a natural thing for me. But to be able to be a catalyst where you bring somebody out of their comfort zone to somewhere that inspires them to go home and be I don't want to say a better person, a different person, more involved in their community. Like, that is, to me, such an honor to be able to do that for somebody, for the community they live in, and for my community in New Orleans. And yes, I do refer to it as home and my community, because people say to me all the time when they meet me, when they're born and raised or from New Orleans, they meet me and they're like, "So you're from New Orleans, huh?" And I'm like, no, from Vancouver. And they're like, "No, you have to be from New Orleans. Like, you just get the city. You're like, everything, like, things." And I've had a lot of people say to me, "Your spirit is from New Orleans." And I just think that's so cool. If you're wondering what it's like to volunteer in New Orleans, we show up to volunteer with St. Bernard Project, and we usually sign up a couple of months ahead. They know we're coming. And I always ask for a house on a public transit route so we can, do the bus thing, keep our costs low. And I always encourage people, you're going to come down, you're going to do things you've never done before, and I want you to just be in the moment, step out of your comfort zone, and just be open to every opportunity that comes your way, whether it's on the work site or whether it's just hanging out in the city. And people have had these really cool experiences. We had this one gal, she was actually the general manager at the time of one of the New Orleans themed restaurants here in Vancouver. And she was like, "I'm coming down and I just want to step out of my comfort zone and do new things." And so we were down for the 10th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. And they were doing a 24-hour build. So you sign up for an 8-hour shift, go into your shift and go. And they had news people on site and everything. And it was just like a really cool time to be in the city. And one of the things we were doing in the house is we were installing door frames in all of the rooms. And so it involved using an I'm terrible with things, electric screwdriver. I don't know. Anyways, it was a power tool, and Amy was terrified of power tools, terrified of them. And so I got a little tough with her because I'm a little bit about tough love. And I said, "Amy, you came all this way to step out of your comfort zone. What do you mean you don't want to use a power tool? That's like totally stepping out of your comfort zone." No, I don't want to do it. This is like, no. I said, "Okay, I'm going to make a deal with you." I said, "I'm going to ask you one more time to do this. I want you to do it. I want you to just try it once, just so you can say you did it. And then if you really, truly hate it and it terrifies you, then I'm not even going to say another word about it." So we get the site coordinator to come over and give her a private lesson on how to use it. And Amy does it with success. And she's like, I look at her, I'm like, "Are we good? Are we putting it down, walking away? What do we?" She's like, "Oh no, this is kind of cool. I'll do some more. I'll do this whole door frame." So I'm like, okay. 3 hours later, our 8-hour shift ends, and we are prying the power tool out of Amy's hands. We're like, "Amy, we have to go. Our shift is over. Can we just stay for the next shift? I really like this. This is really cool." And I was just like, "I don't want to say I told you so, but I told you so. Like, just give it a little try." And so again, it's another thing where I get to see people step out of their comfort zone and just like accomplish new things. And we've done so many different stages of things in rebuilding houses. Like, if I ever needed a second career, I'm pretty sure I could get into construction. I've helped install the kickboards around the room. I've installed shelves into closets. I've hung door frames, and I've done mudding. I've put up drywall and all these things. But my biggest accomplishment to date, I thought I had a piece of it here, but I don't. It must be in another room. Anyways, I attempted installing like hardwood or like whatever you call them, the parquet, whatever, floors, 3 times. 3 different houses, 3 different site coordinators, could not figure out how to actually do the floors. I was just like, I will do anything. Like, I will paint the outside of the house. I will install a toilet. I don't really install toilets. I will do the grossest job. Please, please, please don't make me put in floors. I am terrible at it. This family deserves better. So we get to this one site in, it's probably about 2017, 2016. And I was down with a friend of mine that I'd met through working at Rocky Mountaineer. And I'm like, oh, we're doing floors, man, no. And I'm like, well, I'm a leader. There's only 2 of us here, but I brought her down. I'm the leader of the 2. I firmly believe in leading by example. So I suck it up, and I'm like looking around, and I'm like, okay, this is cool. We've got 10 people. The work site we were on had 10 other people who were learning how to be site managers. So I said, well, maybe this will be okay. Like, maybe one of them will have a way to like train me how to do this. So here we are. We're at the point where we have to learn how to do the floors, and I'm like just dreading it. Like, I couldn't even sleep the night before because I was so nervous about doing these floors. And the trainer who was training all the site managers started explaining things, and all of a sudden she was explaining it in a way that I could actually understand how to install, like how to put these floors together. And to make a very long story short, I was the only one who could figure out how to, there was this fireplace and it had a bunch of really weird angles to get the wood in next to it. And do you know that I was the only one who could figure out how to do the angles around the fireplace? And from that point on, that was day 1 of the floors. And we have the whole rest of the week, right? Yes, I did. They actually put me, a volunteer, in charge of the floors. They were like, anybody working on the floors, you go talk to Co. She's in charge. And I brought home a little piece of a scrap. And I actually I would love to work for St. Bernard Project. Habitat is a great organization, but they just didn't jive with me. So I've been doing all my volunteering through St. Bernard Project, which is actually an amazing project started by a lawyer and a school teacher who moved from Washington, D.C. To help in New Orleans and start their own organization. Thank you, Tia. But yeah, so here I was. I learned how to do floors. I really learned how to do it. And I came home from that trip so stinking proud of myself because I had overcome something that I literally in my lifetime thought I'd never be able to do. And when I have really tough times and I think I can't do something, I go back to that moment. That was like the 4th time. Oh, here's my alarm coming on. Let me turn that off. 4th time. And here I was. I did it. And sometimes you just need the right person to use the right words to explain something to you. And you just get it. Like, you never know when you're going to have a light bulb moment. And I think that's really anything to do with life. One of my other favorite memories is at the end of the first week of volunteer trips to New Orleans. And I was so overwhelmed and overstimulated by just being in this amazing city. And we'd had emotions that run high. Everybody was tired. There was heat. We'd met 5-year-olds who had these outrageous stories of having to sleep in a canoe, trying to be rescued, and like walking for miles to get to a bus that wasn't even going anywhere. Like, just, it was a week. It was such a week. And I had this thing in my mind where like the kids, the youth were all going to stay in the hotel on the Friday night after our team dinner. And the adults were all going to go and hang out together in New Orleans and enjoy our last night in New Orleans, kind of New Orleans style, Bourbon Street, whatever. And people were exhausted. Now, I'm like, I don't care how tired I am. We are in New Orleans. We need to go out and celebrate. And they just weren't into it. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. And the adults got stuck in a swamp tour. Their boat broke down in the dark. He had alligators trying to, they thought crawl on the boat and everything. I would have paid big money to be there. That would have been so much fun. I love alligators. Anyways, I had called the pastor of our church who was on our trip, and I was like, hey, started to cry because I was like, I had all this idea of how Friday night was going to go. Nobody wants to hang out with me. Just emotions were running high. And I get teary-eyed just thinking about it. And so he's like, you know what? Just hang tight. I'm like, no, I'm just going to go out to Bourbon Street by myself. I don't even care. I'm going out. I'm not letting anybody stop me or anything. And so he's like, no, just wait. We'll be there in 20 minutes. I just need to call Jen, say goodnight to her and the kids, and then we're going to go out. Don't leave. Stay right where you are. I'll come find you. So half an hour later, he takes me off to Bourbon Street. Of course, being part of the adult trip, they had already been to Bourbon Street once or twice that week. So he kind of knew his way around. And I will remember this for forever. We were staying at a hotel about 3 blocks away. We were in the central business district. So we had to walk a few blocks to get to the French Quarter to Bourbon Street. And when we walk up to Bourbon and Canal, there's a brass band on the corner. And he's like, listen to this. This is real New Orleans music. So we're standing there outside the Foot Locker, and there's this 8-piece brass band just playing on a street corner. And I had goosebumps, and I was loving it. And we were dancing, just the two of us hanging out. We've been friends since we were 14 years old, hanging out on a street corner in New Orleans, listening to the most insane music. It was so good. And so we stood there for 5 minutes, and then he turned around and he looked at me. He's like, okay, let's go. And so he literally, I always tell people, first time I went out in New Orleans, I hung out with my pastor, and he bought me my first drink on Bourbon Street. And we went to a little daiquiri stand, and we went in and out of the gift shops and danced in the middle of the street, and just had this gloriously amazing last night in New Orleans. And I will forever be grateful for that night. And I think that was really my first step into the culture of New Orleans. I remember everywhere we went in the city, I would look at things in awe, the architecture, and you smell the food cooking, and people literally, sell food on street corners as a side hustle, and all these cool things. And it's just such a different environment and culture. And at the end of that week, I was like, oh yeah, I have to come back. I so have to come back to New Orleans. This is amazing. And I was already trying to do that. How am I going to do this again? We need to do another trip. And I just knew I had to come back. And it just became a thing where we did the trips through my church for a couple of years. And then people would just come up to me and be like, hey, can you let me know when the next time is to go to New Orleans? I want to come and volunteer. And it just kind of became a thing with me where I was always just hey, I'm planning a trip. Anybody want to come with? And I feel like I've almost got it down to an art form, and I find out who's coming, and I plan the week based on if we have more foodies coming, that I really strategically plan all the restaurants we're going to. If it's people who are all about music, live music, then I put more effort into planning what clubs we're going to go to, and all the other street music and times when we can encounter that, and just all this fun. And it's just so amazing to be able to watch people experience New Orleans for the first time. And then also, no matter how much I tell them about New Orleans and how much I love the city, they get there and they're just like, oh yeah, now I get why you like it or why you love it or whatever. And I always go back though to that first time when we first were driving into New Orleans. So I was in the lead vehicle of our little minivan caravan. And we had to go from the airport, which is just outside the city, into downtown New Orleans to our hotel. And we had agreed to go caravan style. We were the lead vehicle and we're driving, and we were busy talking and like looking around at everything around us. And we didn't realize we'd actually lost the other 3 vehicles at the last light. And we're like, oh no, like, oh, well, they've all got directions on how to get there. And we drove through a part of New Orleans that was still very much looked like Hurricane Katrina had just happened. And this is like almost 2 years later, I guess. Yeah, 2 years later. And like all the street lights were not working. And like some of the streets had been turned into, they were one ways, but they turned into one ways the other way. Oh, thank you, Polly. Very, very lovely of you. And I just remember like, there's like, it's hot. There's people hanging out in the street corners. Like there's no lights. Things are broken. There's potholes in the streets everywhere, which I now understand is just the thing in New Orleans. And I remember for a split second thinking, what have I done? I've brought 8 teenagers down to this city that's basically almost third world status at the moment. And I've agreed to look after these kids for a week in a city that looks like this. Like, you got to be kidding. How did I think this was a good idea? And I really started to doubt myself pretty hugely. And I got really, really quiet and stopped talking. And then I was worried because the other vehicles were lost and like till they showed up at the hotel. And I remember going to bed and just being like, I don't know if this was such a good idea. Maybe I shouldn't have been so exuberant about all of this. Like maybe I just need to calm down a little bit and figure out how to help New Orleans myself. I don't know. And then we woke up in the morning and we had this amazing day, like I told you about at the beginning, where we went to the church of the guy on the Spike Lee documentary, and they made lunch for us, and we had this private tour on a streetcar and like all these cool experiences. And I was like, oh, okay, like we're going to be all good. This is going to be fine. And it was just so unreal that even then I knew on that day one that I had to come back and I had to help, and that this was not over. My piece of helping the city was not over, but I had a pretty good feeling this was just getting started. And so now I've been to New Orleans like 23. I've actually lost track. I have to go back through my emails and find all my plane tickets. I think I've said this for a few times, but I honestly think that this time when I go back in November might actually be my 25th time to New Orleans since 2007. To the point where when I go through the border and I say I'm going to New Orleans and they can see it all, they're like, again? I'm like, what can I say? I love the city. I love the music. I love the food. Like, I love the people. One of the biggest blessings getting through the pandemic was I was like, I don't even know how I'm going to go through this. Like, I have 3 jobs. Now I can't go to any of my jobs and I'm stuck at home for like who knows how long. And at the time, my living situation was quite horrible. I was living with this roommate who was literally like crazy. Everything was all about her cat. And if I left a speck of juice on the counter, she'd be like, my cat might lick it. Like, no, you can't do that. I couldn't do anything. I was like basically a prisoner in my own house. And I had to live in a tiny, tiny little 10 by 10 foot bedroom. Couldn't really leave the house except if I was leaving the house. And the kitchen was, I can't even talk about it. So here I am living in this horrible situation that was temporary till I could find something better. And I'm like, how am I going to make it through this pandemic? Like, who knows how long we're all going to be on lockdown. And then I was I posted something on Facebook, and a lady from my new church in New Orleans, which I've already been going to for like 8 years, posted or private messaged me and said, hey, if you're, oh, thank you, Poppy. If you're looking for something to do to kind of fill your time in a positive way, our church, First Grace, could really use some help on the care ministry team, just reaching out to everybody during COVID, during the pandemic, to make sure they're okay. And I was like, yes, I'm on it. And so at our church, when they send out stuff for prayer requests, they send out the address, the phone number, so you can text people, send them a little message, send them a postcard or a card or something, right? Lift their spirits. So then I got this great idea. I'm like, I live in Canada. I'm going to send them a postcard with some beautiful scenery from Vancouver, and just send them a little note and let them know that they're being thought of. And so then we had a monthly call, and then like all of a sudden I was like so involved in my church with New Orleans and getting to know the people even better. And, you know, I called my list to make sure they were okay. And they're like, wait, you're calling from where? And I'm like, oh yeah, like I live in Vancouver. And they're like, and you go to First Grace? I'm like, whenever I'm in town, I do. And so again, like it's just one experience after another. And part of my purpose is, one of the things that's very important to me is making sure that the people around me are smiling. And when I get to bring people to New Orleans to volunteer and see their smiles, like it's just amazingly out of this world. The other thing I love is the experience of being in New Orleans. And I've learned a lot about the city. I know a lot about the culture. I know how to show it off. I know some of the history of the city. I can tell stories. I can show them all the cool things from movies. I know where Sandra Bullock's house is. Just different things. Like anybody who knows me knows that anything I get into, I do 110%. In New Orleans is no different, though I'd say it's probably more like 150%. And one of my nieces came down to New Orleans with me in 2012, and she was going to university in Halifax, and along with another kid that used to referee for me. I shouldn't say kid, young adult. And then a couple of 20-somethings that I knew through basketball and like all this. So a bunch of these college-age kids came down with me. And so it's really important to me to kind of give them a good first night impression, because our first night in town was a Saturday night, going to be followed by Jazz Fest the next day. So Saturday night had to be pretty amazing to like, you know, contend with Jazz Fest the next day. So here we were, we took like the bus into the city, into downtown, because we were staying just a little on the edge of the city. And we had a little bit of craziness. It was Jazz Fest. I'd never been to New Orleans during Jazz Fest. And so I didn't realize how bad the traffic would be. Although you'd think if I'd thought about it, I might have been able to figure it out. But whatever, it's all part of the story. So we're hanging out with like a cajillion other people waiting for the streetcar, and we squish into the streetcar and we roll into the city like 10 minutes later. And I was like, man, if it's this busy, like what are the restaurants going to be like? So I start like texting to see if any of my friends are at a restaurant that they can maybe get us in, or like we can join their table or something. And friends of mine who are musicians, very dear friends of mine, Brandon and Luke, were just getting ready to go play for the evening, and they'd gone down for dinner, and they're like, oh, we're at Oceana, and it's not very busy. Come now, and we'll get your name in at the door. We know the waitress really well. Like we'll get her to save you a table. So we made our way there, and not only had they saved us a table, it was in the courtyard. So here we are, first night dinner, Saturday night in New Orleans. It's like 9:30, and it's dark. And we could literally see, oh, is it your favorite restaurant there? Awesome. It's a pretty good one. So here we were sitting in a courtyard eating alligator and gumbo. Everybody ordered a dish, and then we just all tried everything from everybody else's plate. We'd never do that now during the pandemic, but whatever. We all lived. Anyways, here we are in this courtyard at these cool cast iron tables and chairs. You could look up and see the stars in the city, and it was just like so beautiful. And my niece looked at me and she was just like, Auntie, this is like the best night ever. And that just warmed my heart. It was so amazing. I was so happy that she was happy. And I looked around the table, and again, here's all those smiles. And we went to the club after to actually hear my friends play. My niece was under, and a couple of them were underage, but we just kind of snuck them in and sat them in the back. And they were like, if the police come in, you got to go out this window. Like, you've got to be ready to go. And so to me, it's all been about experiences, which kind of leads me up to where I am now, where I just realize everything I do is on a theme. It's all about creating an experience for somebody. And it started long before that. But New Orleans and all the opportunities there have just drawn it out of me. And I've had a chance to kind of hone my skills on how to create experiences for people, and how to make people smile, and how to make people feel good, and kind of be proud of who they are. And in all of it, I get to show off the city of New Orleans. Like, how cool is that? And it's just been such an amazing ride. And I think back to like literally like 17 years ago. Okay, 17 years and 1 week ago, let's say, before they started doing any of the newscasts about the hurricane or tropical storm at that point, and how it looked like it might turn into a category 5 and all this. Here I was just living my life as a volunteer basketball coach, working a couple of jobs, and life was good. I would even say at that point it was probably fabulous. I didn't know any different. And then this hurricane happened and wiped out, like flooded 80% of the city. And thank you, Audra. And again, I'm going to go back to that, seeing the image of the people waiting on the roof, waiting to be rescued. And then in that first trip, hearing the stories of people waiting to be rescued and just how awful it was. And like, literally, I can't even explain. It was like somebody had their hand wrapped around my heart, and it was squeezing it and just telling me, like, this is you, this is your thing, this is your time, this is your opportunity. And years ago, I think it was on the 10th anniversary of Katrina, or it might have even been a different one, like the 12th or 13th. Anyways, I was at my church, First Grace, and they did a whole Sunday thing on, instead of focusing all the negative things and how long it was taking the city to come back and how they'd been treated so horribly, and Red Cross forgot about, never gave them the money from the donations they collected, and like all these, I mean, you could go on for hours about all the terrible things that happened after Hurricane Katrina. But my pastor decided to focus on all of the amazing positive things that came out of it. And there's a couple at my church that are now married and have beautiful children, and they are the most beautiful family. I love them with all of my heart. I've been lucky enough to stay in their 1-bedroom basement suite a couple of times when I've been in New Orleans, that they've just gifted me for the week for free. Like, how amazing is that? And so they had a bunch of different people stand up and tell their stories of, because of Hurricane Katrina, I now have this beautiful, blessed life. And I sat there, and I think I was actually like crying in church, because I just thought, if Hurricane Katrina had never happened, I would be living a very different life right now. I'm sure it would be fabulous, because I wouldn't know any different. But I am just so grateful to be part of this city, part of the culture, have all the knowledge and these friends. I think one last illustration I'm going to give before I go, because I'm going to have to end this in about 5 minutes, because I do have to go to work to my other job. But I'm loving being here and telling these stories. So in case I forget later, thank you so much for indulging me and being here to hear my stories. Oh shoot, I might have just forgot where I was going with this. Give me a moment. Let me have a sip of coffee. I may have actually lost my train of thought. Nope, I didn't. Here it is. So I'm going to sum up New Orleans for you in one little story. And so I'm going to say it was probably, trying to think, it was around 2013 or 2014. And I'd made all these amazing friends. And I think at the time it was before I worked at Rocky and got into tourism. So at the time I was working like 3 part-time jobs, and specifically so that I could just be like, I need a week off to go to New Orleans, or I need 4 days to go to New Orleans for the weekend. And I actually at that point, oh, thank you, Audra, I really appreciate it. At that point, I was going to New Orleans every 3 or 4 months. And I would budget. I watched my money so tightly. I had like this rule where I could come home from New Orleans, and for the first week I could buy and do whatever I wanted. And then after that, it was like start saving for the next trip and watching the plane tickets and all this kind of stuff. So I had it down to, you could say, a science, really. And I had dear, dear, dear friends. I still refer to them as they were my housemates in New Orleans for years until they moved away. And Brandon and Luke were having a commitment ceremony before the whole equal rights thing came in. And they were like, we're just going to do it. We're not going to wait. We're just going to do this. So we're having a wedding. And you have to be there because we're not doing it without you. And I was like, wow, like that meant the world to me. So I literally went down for 4 nights to New Orleans for their wedding. And they did the whole New Orleans thing. There was like a crawfish boil the night before. And these guys catered their own wedding. They made their own gumbo and jam. Brandon's gumbo is better than anybody's anywhere. And they made all the food. Actually, Brandon did most of the cooking with a friend of theirs. And then Luke did all the cakes and the pies and all of that. And I knew this was going to be a good wedding because they're well connected in the city. Luke is from I want to say Gulfport or something like that. And Brandon is from Cajun country. And so I was like, this is going to be a good wedding. It's going to be a good wedding. They had rented a bed and breakfast for the weekend. There was space for friends to stay there with them. There was a kitchen they had use of. And then finally the day came, the morning of. Me and my friend Emily, I was staying at her house. We got all dressed up and ready to go. And we'd gone out shopping the day before for their wedding presents. And which I saw are still sitting on their front porch in their house way up in Cajun country. Made me feel good. So we go to the wedding and I'm sitting there and I'm just like, get out. You do not get any more New Orleans than this event right here, right now. Now, I'm trying to paint it. So here we are. We're sitting in this courtyard in New Orleans and it's in March. So the weather is not cold. It's not hot. It's kind of their spring weather. And they have all the chairs set out in a U shape in the courtyard. And the whole ceremony is taking place on the balcony on the second level. And I am sitting there with my dear friend Emily, who is as fairly straight-laced as you can be in New Orleans. Catholic girl. Love her with all my heart. And we are sitting next to drag queens. And there are people wearing jeans and t-shirts. And there are people wearing gowns. And we have one of the, Brandon played at a club that was owned by the lady that owns all the tropical isles in New Orleans. And I'm sitting next to Miss Pam, who is like a gajillionaire. And she's brought her own sweet tea vodka and she's pouring me drinks during the ceremony on the side. So we're sitting there and there's drag queens and people in jeans and there's like people dressed up and and everybody, it's New Orleans, so everybody's new best friend. And there's a fountain in the middle that has these two alligator statues in it, which, if you know me, I love alligators. I'm obsessed with gators. So I'm already like, this is so cool. This is so cool. You just don't get any more New Orleans than this. And then I remembered that the person doing the ceremony was a voodoo priestess. Like, how amazing. Then I couldn't even believe it, because she starts off the ceremony for this wedding, and it's this voodoo priestess done up in her garb, and she's reading 1 Corinthians 13 out of the Bible. And I'm just like, this is it. Like, this, you just can't get any more New Orleans than this. And I remember just looking around and being like, how lucky am I to be able to be just a part of this culture with these people in this moment, in this magical, amazing city that has stolen my heart. I mean, people are in relationships with other people. I honest to God think I'm in a relationship with New Orleans. Like, I love this city with every fiber of my being. And it just, I don't know that I'm going to do one with Jay, Carla. I am going to do some tours. I have to see, I'm crazy busy right now with stuff. There's 2 guides in New Orleans. I might see if I can get in touch with them and see what's going on. I'm really only in the city for 4 days, and I've got some stuff to do while I'm there. I'm going to do some tours, and I need to just hang out with my friends as well. So I'm going to see, I might get in touch with, either way, I'll probably get in touch with Jay before I go. But anyways, I'm going to wrap up here, because I gotta get ready to go to work. But, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to my stories. I hope in some way, maybe you've been inspired somehow. Aw, Jill, you're so sweet. Thank you. Please, please, please follow me. I'm going to be doing tours from there. I'm working on a really cool concept of doing a tour about the movie, Princess and the Frog, and its historical relevance to New Orleans, as well as other things in the city. And just follow me in general. I love telling stories. I love learning history. Oh, you're so welcome, Rhonda. I'm going to be traveling to St. Augustine before I go to New Orleans in November. I'm going to be going to New York City. Yes, you do, Carla. Definitely go to New Orleans and have some fun. If you need any suggestions or whatever, you can hit me up. Actually, I have an Instagram called Girl on a Bus Adventures. You can follow me on Instagram. I also have a Facebook group called Girl on a Bus Adventures. And if you look up CEAUX on Facebook, you can probably find me. So go ahead, send me a friend request or whatever. Follow me on Facebook. I love history. I love cool stories. I love finding out the cool things about different cities and places. I love sharing my stories. I love sharing my life with people. And I love inspiring people to go out and live their best life and make some amazing memories while they're doing it. I'm all about the magic of New Orleans, but the magic in everyday life as well. I believe you can see the good in everything and everyone. Sometimes you just have to dig a little deeper. And again, I'm so grateful for the chance here today to share some of my story. I almost feel like I could do a part 2. In fact, I'm probably going to do one of these same name tours while I'm in New Orleans, because I keep wondering if maybe there's some different stories and feelings that will come to mind. Yes, I would love to do. I'm going to do that then, Jill, just for you. I will do part 2 in New Orleans. I may keep it under the same title. But I kind of feel like this, even if I keep it under the same title, I think that it would be just such a different atmosphere that I would just end up with different stories. You might hear some of the same stories, and just different things. So you guys have inspired me to do this in New Orleans and see how it goes, because I think it's going to be even more fabulous. Again, my sincere appreciation for those of you who are in a position where you're able to leave a tip. It is greatly appreciated. For those of you who don't have those means, if you have a moment and could leave me a review on how you enjoyed today's little story time, that is, to me, is just as powerful as a tip. Okay, go ahead, follow me. Please hit some notifications so that you see when stuff is coming up. I'm going to be doing a Breakfast at Tiffany's tour in New York City. Might be almost like half home tour, half out on the road or on the street. As you know, Breakfast at Tiffany's was written by Truman Capote, who's from New Orleans. So watch for that angle coming up too. For those of you who are just joining now, I'm so sorry. We've already gone overtime. I am going to be saying goodbye. But if you've just joined, all of you can go ahead and hit the notification to be notified when I do this again, because the next time I do this talk, I'm going to be doing it from New Orleans, my favorite city. And wherever you guys are from, I hope you all have a very, very, very blessed day. If it's already past daytime and you're getting ready to go to bed, may you have some sweet and magical dreams. Again, thank you to everybody who's followed, who leaves a review, who is inspired by my stories, who's given me amazing feedback. You don't even know how much I appreciate all of you. And at this point, I'm going to have to say goodbye and go out and live a blessed day. Again, thank you so much. You've been amazing. And I look forward to seeing all of you on my future tours, whether they're out on the streets of Vancouver, the streets of New Orleans, somewhere else, or here letting me tell you stories from at home. Okay? Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.